Hi guys, welcome back to another YA book review for the West Lincoln Public Library. I am Sarah. Happy Pride Month. It is June. We are doing LGBT as our theme, and I cannot wait to introduce you guys to the book that I chose for this month. As always, I'm a bit of a fantasy nerd, and that's why this book seemed so absolutely perfect. I have been dying to read it. It was on my to-read list for entirely too long, and I finally had a chance to show it off to you guys. It is called Cinderella is Dead by Kalynn Bayron. I was so thrilled that I was allowed to read this book for this month. It's gonna be so good. We recently got into the Smithville branch, so as soon as I am done with it, after my third reread, I highly recommend you run out and pick it up. Kalynn Bayron has quickly become one of my favorite authors. She's got another book coming out at the end of this month called This Poison Heart. I think you will also really enjoy that one. Won't spoil anything. I'll leave it to you to go and look for it. But in the meantime, let's talk about a book that deals strongly in racial undertones, LGBTQ rights, patriarchy, masculine heteronormativity, male privilege, and of course, finding someone and loving someone for who they are and recognizing that love goes both ways in a relationship. So I gotta say, right from the get-go, the theme of this book is a retelling of the classic Cinderella, which you can probably tell from the title. Basically, it is 200 years since the original Cinderella fairy tale happened, where she found her Prince Charming at the ball, they married, and they fell in love. However, this version of the world that they live in, which is called Linnell, is incredibly restrictive towards women and young girls. There is a curfew for all women. They are essentially deemed property towards the one gentleman who runs the household, which is usually the father or the husband. They cannot be allowed to make money for themselves. All money go to the head of household, which is again the husband or the father. And every year when a girl turns 16, she is invited to the current ruling king's ball. Which might sound like a great honor, but in reality it is so that they can be chosen by a man as a suitable wife. They are then essentially deemed property once they have a claim given to them, so to speak, and they live out their lives as no more than servants in another man's household, essentially. I liked the idea that in the original Cinderella fairy tale, Cinderella went to the ball 3 times. You are allowed to go to a ball 3 times, 3 years in a row, from 16 to 18. But it's deemed your really bad practice if you go to more than one, like you were undesirable and you couldn't get a husband after the first one. And if you fail to get a husband after the 3rd ball, you are deemed forfeit. And you are essentially sent off to work in the farms or the mines out of city. Which, by the way, Marseille is the entire area of which this is all set in. I was first overwhelmed by how little even the concept of women's rights came up. It was very clearly indoctrined into their religion and their day-to-day lives. There are certain rules and heads that bylaws that all women are expected to follow, such as reading from the Cinderella fairy tale every day. They have pictures of the king and Cinderella hung up in most of their houses. It was pretty bizarre to read at first, because everyone knows the Cinderella fairy tale as be kind and kindness will come back to you. But in this version, it's been warped into something that if you are quiet and not problematic and obey anything that a man tells you to do, you will live a happy life. Now, our main character is this girl, 16-year-old Sophia. She's just come of age, in which she's allowed to attend her first ball for the city of Marseille, and she wants absolutely nothing to do with it. She has been in love with her best friend, Erin, who is a girl, for the last 3 years, and would much rather run off and marry her. But obviously, following the whole narrative, there is no such thing as a man marrying a man and a woman marrying a woman in this society. So it's completely out of the question for Sophia to even consider that. It was mentioned in some of the stories, parents that find out that their children are gay or questioning and don't necessarily want to partake in the ball or marry a man if they're a girl will be deemed forfeit before they even turn 16 and will be sent off to the castle, never to be seen again. So the parents are very much just as much under the thrall and the persuasion of this whole patriarchal society as anyone. That was probably the most shocking part in a lot of the instances in which Sophia works to change King Manfred, who is the current ruling king, his terrible rules and the rules that have been in society for 200 years. Her parents do not support her all that much. Not a lot of the parents do for any of their children in this book, which was incredibly discouraging, I imagine. She is incredibly independent and self-reliant. She really doesn't have anyone she can turn to. The girl that she's been in love with and has been secretly seeing for the last few years, Erin, doesn't even really try to make any movements towards changing their fate. She has all but accepted the fact that they are going to this ball, they're going to get married off to men, and live out the rest of their lives with no say and no rights. And that just doesn't sit well with Sophia. She tries to encourage her to run away, but it never works out. And when they finally go to their party, it ends with Sophia running out of it and running into Cinderella's grave, her mausoleum. And there she meets a girl named Constance, who she will later find out is a direct descendant of Cinderella and her stepsisters. And she finds out through her that the entire narrative that her family and generations before her for the last 200 years has been taught is all wrong. It's a complete lie. And this fairy tale of a fairy tale is being used to reinforce all these nonsensical, male-dominated laws and societal rules. So, with Constance's help, to embark towards finding a solution, finding a way to dethrone the king, taking down all these terrible societal expectations and gender norms, and giving women and their freedom back, and people that don't want to marry, allowing them the freedom to do so. I was incredibly impressed with how they pulled off all the action scenes in this book. There was plenty of great tension, none to be spared. I was very surprised at how well the characters, it was pretty fast paced in the beginning of the book. They were all introduced very well, despite a lot of things being thrown at you right at the beginning. I definitely read this book fast, less than a day. Probably took me like 5 hours. Because once you start reading, you really couldn't put it down. It is a standalone too, so if you don't have a ton of time set aside for reading at any given point, this is great. You can just sit down. It will completely enthrall you, and you can whack it out in an afternoon and have a great time doing it. I really just loved all the messages that this book went through, saying loving yourself, being free to love who you wish, taking action when you know action is required. It was a really strong, independent, don't need no man heroine. But it also reinforced that it's okay to rely on others. She was terrified at the thought that she was completely alone in wanting to take action, and that never stopped her in trying to do so. And in doing so, it's how she met a kindred soul in Constance, who wanted the same thing, freedom for women. And together, they make an absolutely incredible duo. I cannot wait to read Kalynn Bayron's next book. She writes absolutely incredible young women and female characters in general. I think her next read will be stellar. If you want really sweet, genuine romance and a retelling of a classic, I cannot recommend Cinderella's Dead enough. Of course, I don't really have any necessarily warnings tied to this book. There is depictions of violence, nothing over the top or graphic. There is witchcraft. There is that's kind of it. There's not really a ton of unsavory language, no graphic scenes, nothing like that. Overall, it's a love story, a an uprising, a dystopian. It is all the good stuff that you could love, not to mention a Black female lead action hero who I loved to bits. Sophia was amazing in this. Definitely go out, grab this book from the West Lincoln Public Library. It is at the Smithville branch, but of course you can get it at any of our other ones too. We will send it out to you. Grab it as soon as you can. Happy Pride Month, everybody, and I will be back to see you soon. Bye all.